In a normal year, on this particular Monday, this square would look completely different. And that's because the third Monday in April is when Zurich celebrates its biggest festival and its most famous, Sechseläuten, or Sechseläuten in Swiss German. And what a strange festival it is! It combines costume parades with weather predictions and grilling sausages, and to top it all off, lighting a 3.4 meter tall snowman stuffed with explosives on fire in the middle of one of the world's major cities. So, how did this festival come to be? Well, the answer to that question is perhaps even more fascinating than the festival itself, and it's what this video is going to be about. And make sure you stick around to the end because, for obvious reasons, in 2021, Sechseläuten isn't happening. And so we're going to celebrate on a smaller scale, but still with a bang. And for those who are new here, I'm Jenny and you're watching Swistified, where we demystify Swiss culture and take you behind the stories of this fascinating country's history and traditions. If it seems like Sechseläuten is a bit of a hodgepodge, that's because it is. It combines elements from many different festivals, and we'll take a look at each of those in detail. But first, the name. Sechseläuten gets its name from the words for six and chimes. During the winter, tradesmen could only work until 5 p.m. due to the short days and lack of natural light. In spring, on the equinox, the day when it was finally bright enough for tradesmen to work an hour longer than during the winter, quittin' time was marked by the 6 chimes of the church bells. The coming of spring and the first longer workday were celebrated with speeches, music, and feasts by the local tradesmen's guilds. And this holiday goes way back. There are references to it already in the 16th century. And I think it's funny that only in Zurich are people so thrilled about getting to work more that it became the biggest local celebration. German speakers will notice that the name of the festival, especially when said in Swiss German, sounds like Sechseläute, which would be translated as sexy people.
Wo sind die Sechseläuten?
So that's the name, but what about the parades, the weather predictions, the sausage party, and blowing up a snowman? Well, we should first look at the guilds, since without them, this festival literally wouldn't exist. And I do mean that. They're the ones who organize and pay for it each year. The guilds are also inextricably linked with the history of Zurich. Before 1336, Zurich was ruled by knights and noblemen from magistrate families. They didn't treat the tradesmen the best, to put it mildly, and on June 7, 1336, the tradesmen and some other noblemen stormed the city hall, aka the Rat House, and drove them away. Rudolf Brünn, the leader of the coup and later the mayor, drafted a constitution that named 13 different guilds, and the guilds shared power with the Society of Constafel, of which only noblemen and well-to-do tradesmen were members. The guilds were originally in the minority in terms of political power, but over the years they wielded more and more. And in their heyday, guild members also helped out with war duties, guarding the city, and firefighting. Only men could be members, although women could still run trade businesses, especially if they were widows of one of the members. And the guilds had a very high standing and were important political entities all the way up until 1798, when due to a French victory, the guilds had to give up their political power. They later got some political power back, only to lose it again for good in 1866. And now the once mighty guilds have been reduced to private associations like any other you might set up for your singing or volleyball club. But that also paved the way for other guilds to be founded that didn't have a link to specific trades. These were known as the Zünfte, which can be loosely translated as neighborhood guilds. So the first parades were held at night in 1818 by some of the guilds. And in 1839, it's the first record of the guilds celebrating together at Lindenhof. After that, between 1839 to 1870, there were elaborate thematic costume parades, kind of echoing the Fastnacht practice of dressing up before Lent that still goes on in a lot of the Catholic cantons in Switzerland. And if you haven't heard of Fastnacht or Carnival before, it's similar to Mardi Gras, so one last chance to party like crazy before Lent. The Guild's today's main purpose is to preserve traditions and customs, and as such, during the parade on Monday, they now wear historical costumes that have some meaning for their guild. Many tourists come to Zurich to see the snowmen being blown up, but there's a lot more to Sechseläuten than that, and most of the activities are participated in by the guilds. Sechseläuten actually starts on Friday night at Lindenhof, where a guest canton will showcase the food and other attributes that make it special. On Saturday, there are balls and lavish banquets. And here's a menu card from one of them from the early 20th century. On Sunday, the guilds help to organize the children's parade. More on that later. And on Monday, the guilds have their own parade. After the snowman is blown up, they then go on visits to different guild houses, and one member of the guild gives a speech, which another member of the guild that was visited has to answer. It's kind of a bit of banter back and forth. They'll go through the small streets in central Zurich carrying lanterns, and it makes for an atmosphere a bit like Fastnacht in Basel. Some of the individual guilds also have their own traditions on Sechseläuten. For example, the Bakers Guild throws out rolls from the window of their guild house at 11 a.m. on Monday morning. So if you're a hungry tourist and having a bit of sticker shock with Zurich prices, make sure to be there at that time. Although we have the guilds to thank for Sechseläuten, they're not without controversy. Women are not allowed to join guilds. Until very recently, they weren't allowed to march in the parades due to tradition. However, this tradition only goes back to a rule made in 1952. Before that, women were able to join the parade, and they did. Incidentally, it was also in 1952 that the date for Sechseläuten was moved from March 21st to the third Monday of April, unless it coincides with Easter. So, since 1952, women's role was just to give roses and gifts to the guild members they knew as they paraded by. Well, this didn't sit well with some women, and in 1989, the Society of Fraumünster was founded. Fraumünster is the famous church with the windows painted by Marc Chagall, and back in the Middle Ages, it was, of course, cloisters for nuns, and that's where the name comes from. Since the Women's Guild wasn't recognized by the Zentralkomitee of Guilds, they were not allowed to join the parade, and so they would march the same route half an hour before the men, but they still were never put on the official program. In recent years, they've at least been able to march in the parade along with the Gesellschaft zur Kunststafelguild, and will officially be their guests until 2024. After that, it will be interesting to see if the Central Committee of the Guilds can open up their minds a little bit and let them have a permanent place in the parade. But for a country in which women only got the right to vote 50 years ago, that sadly might still be too tall an order. So let's next tackle the snowman in the room, the Böögg, whose fiery demise is the main attraction at Sechseläuten. The what? Well, the word Böögg seems to be a bit similar to the word boogeyman that we have in English, and it refers to a terrifying figure or spirit. This tradition of burning a Böögg goes way back, although it wasn't always in the form of a snowman. First, burning things in effigy is still a pretty common tradition in Europe at this time of year, to celebrate the end of winter and the coming of spring, or to celebrate a religious holiday like Easter. For example, in Germany, on Shrove Tuesday, straw effigies are burnt in some places to symbolize the burning of sins. In Eastern European countries, usually a witch effigy is burned. Or in some cases, first burned and then drowned, like poor Mats Anna in Poland. It's similar in Switzerland. This tradition goes way back. In fact, there are even other festivals in Switzerland where a snowman is burned, but Zürichs is the most famous. Oddly enough, there's even a similar celebration in the small town of Helvetia, West Virginia, in which Old Man Winter is burned during the town's Fastnacht celebration. Swiss settlers took this tradition with them when they founded the town in 1876. Here, though, the residents dress up in any costumes they like, not just historical ones, since for them it's a typical Fastnacht celebration. And the proceedings are a little different as well. As a Library of Congress webpage describes it, On the Saturday night before Ash Wednesday, the people of Helvetia put on scary masks and decorate their homes with scary figures to frighten away Old Man Winter. Then they gather at a local restaurant, light colorful lanterns, and walk to the community hall where they parade around the dance floor as their masks are judged. They dance until midnight when the fiddler announces it is time to burn Old Man Winter. The prettiest girl gets on the shoulders of the tallest man and cuts down the effigy of Old Man Winter that is hanging in the middle of the room. They drag it out into the snow, rough it up, and throw it onto a bonfire, showing that it's time for winter to end. In Zurich, it was often the youth in the Kratzquartier neighborhood that lighted effigies on fire on the same day that adults were celebrating having a longer workday. And if you ever feel like your parenting is bad, just take a look at these copper engravings from the 1800s. Yikes. Eventually, someone got the idea to have the children be the ones in charge of creating one effigy to burn and parading it over to a central location, which brought some order to the, pardon the pun, whole shebang. But it was only in 1904 that the Böögg started being blown up on the Sechseläuten square, which was later named that after the festival. As a side note, the children bringing the Böögg to the square is actually also how the children's parade came to be that takes place on Sunday. The children walk through central Zurich in historical costumes, and they bring the Böögg with them. Each year, the poor Böögg is lovingly crafted by official Böögg builder Lucas Meyer, filled up with different types of explosive firecrackers, and hoisted up onto a 10-meter tall pile of kindling in the middle of the city on the third Monday morning in April. He's even placed so that his head is turned towards the St. Peter clock tower, and he can see when his last hour is upon him. Then, on Monday, shortly before 6 p.m., a prominent guest will light the pyre on fire while guild members ride around the Böögg on horseback 3 times as a band plays the Sechseläuten march. Well, except for in 1965, at that time there was a horse sleigh, so the guild members rode around on hobby horses instead. Once the pyre is lit, everyone keeps an eye on the time. That's because it's said that the faster the Böögg's head explodes, the nicer the summer will be. So in principle, a bit like Groundhog Day in the US. The Swiss Meteorological Service, however, has unsurprisingly found no correlation, so take that with a grain of salt. One rather recent tradition is that as the festivities wind down and the pile becomes a big heap of glowing embers, people will grill their sausages over it. The rest of the festival is so formal, historical, and so centered around the guilds that this new tradition is kind of a nice way for a younger generation to make the festival feel a bit more like their own. The Böögg isn't the same every year. In 2019, for example, Zurich was celebrating 500 years of the Reformation, and as a nod to that year the Böögg wore the typical kind of black hat that the famous Reformation priest Zwingli used to wear. In other years, he's been given a bow and arrow or white and blue pants. He's also reflected historical circumstances. Back when he was a straw man and not a snowman, in 1872, during wartime, he had weapons. During the 1879 deficit, he carried a sack of debts. And in 1890, another year with a bad flu, the Russian flu, he was death himself. But there were years like last year when the Böögg was not burned at all, and at least parts of the festivities were not carried out. During World War I, for example, in 1917 and 1918, and then again during 1941, he wasn't burned. During 1943 and 44, the Böögg was burned, but it couldn't happen at Sechseläutenplatz where it usually did, since they were growing wheat and then potatoes there. So the Böögg was burned 2 years in a row on the other side of the lake at the Eine harbor. In 1944, the second of those 2 years, the poor Böögg toppled headfirst into the water. His head was fished out by the Ship's People Guild and thrown onto the fire. This year is going to be another exceptional year for the Böögg. Since Sechseläuten has been cancelled again due to current circumstances, The Böögg is going to be burned in the canton of Uri, and not just anywhere. He'll be burned in the Scholen Gorge on the Devil's Bridge, which certainly sounds dramatic. The location was, of course, chosen to keep there from being masses of live viewers, but the fire will be broadcast on TV. The Böögg has become somewhat of an unofficial mascot for Zurich in the last few years. And now each year there are more and more products featuring the Böögg. For example, you can get a Böögg cake with little flames on it from Sprungli, one of the main chocolatiers in Zurich. A Böögg shoots and ladders game with trivia questions about Zurich. Böögg pendants. And especially appropriate this and last year, a pocket Böögg you can set on fire on your own, either in the traditional or the special Corona edition. And that's what we're going to do now. So we put the Böögg now in a fire pit, far away from where it can hurt anyone, as we should do according to the law. And now there's nothing left but to light it on fire. So this version of the Böögg is the Corona edition, and it's supposed to drive away the virus in addition to winter. But last year that didn't really work, so we'll see what happens this year. All right. All right, so that doesn't seem to be working. We'll switch to the matches. This could take a little while. Oh, you're right.
Have you ever filmed?
Apparently not. So that's that. When we timed it, it was about 7 minutes until the last little firecracker on his head exploded. So I think we're gonna go with that. So shouldn't be a terrible summer, but doesn't sound like it's also gonna be the best summer if we're using it also as the weather report thing. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. And if you want to follow along for more interesting stories about Switzerland and Swiss culture, please like this video and please consider subscribing. And yeah, thank you for watching. And now I'm going to go get some sausage to grill up.